Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Prodigy channel. And in this video, I'm going to give you my top stardoms and situms for week 15 of the 2021 fantasy football season. For most fantasy football leagues out there, the playoffs are starting this week, so it is even more important that we nail those crucial start-sit calls so that you can continue your journey for that fantasy championship. Unless, of course, you have a first-round bye this week. I'm not trying to brag. I do have a first-round bye in a couple leagues, but in some leagues, I still need to keep that gas pedal all the way pushed down to the floor, and we're trying to secure some dubs this week. Before we get into my actual stardoms and situms, I must say I am recording this after the Thursday night game. It is currently Saturday morning. We have some Saturday games, some Sunday games, a Monday game, and then some games got moved to Tuesday. There's a lot of COVID stuff going on, so we're going to try to, sort all that out in the calls that I'm making. And also, since the Thursday game did happen, I can confidently say rest in peace to everyone that went against Travis Kelce. I'm praying for you, man. I'm hoping that you can overcome that, but it's going to be tough. But crazy things happen. I've seen it where one player on a team does absolutely insane like Kelce did on Thursday, and then the rest of their lineup doesn't do enough. And then if you're going against Kelce and you make all the right start-sit calls, you still do have a chance, so stick with it. And with that being said, let's get right into the stardoms. I'm going to begin with my quarterback stardoms, go position by position through all my other stardoms, and then I'm going to move on to the situms. I only have a couple situms to talk about, but the first guy I'm going to talk about on this list for quarterback is Dak Prescott, quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. I'm just bringing him up because he's been, not great the last couple of weeks. 12.2 against the Saints, 11.9 against Washington. In week 15, he does get the New York Giants, so we'll take a look at how they fare against fantasy quarterbacks according to this chart. So they're giving up the 10th most points on the season to quarterbacks. The last 5 weeks, the 11th most, and then the last 3 weeks, the 19th most. So they've been kind of, in the middle of the pack for points given up to quarterbacks. They do have a pretty solid defense, but I do expect a bounce back game against the Giants for Dak Prescott, who, if you look at earlier in the season, in week 5, he did already light them up for a pretty solid game in week 5 this season already, so that is good to see. Dallas is also dealing up with a banged up backfield. Ezekiel Elliott, his performance it seems to have been being limited lately with his knee injury, and Tony Pollard is currently a game time decision with a foot injury as of this recording, so I do think the Cowboys should need to rely on Dak in this game quite a bit. I like him as a low to mid quarterback one. My next stardom quarterback is going to be Tua from the Miami Dolphins. Even without star rookie wide receiver Jalen Waddle, I still like Tua as a solid streaming option. He's been a good player for fantasy lately, and wide receiver DeVante Parker is back as a wide receiver option for him, so that should help alleviate the loss that he suffered from losing Jalen Waddle for this week. And above all, he's playing the New York Jets, one of the worst defenses in the NFL. You can see he's been really, really solid for fantasy lately. In week 11 against the Jets, he had 18.5 points, so that is very solid for fantasy. In week 15, I could see him doing even better, but he still has that security because he's a good quarterback. He has a great matchup, but against the Jets, you always have a ton of upside because their defense is so horrible. So for me, he's a low quarterback one option. And finally, my third stardom quarterback is going to be Jimmy Garoppolo of the San Francisco 49ers. Maybe you're streaming the quarterback position. You don't have the Josh Allens, the Kyler Murrays, the Mahomes, those type of guys. So you're looking for someone that you can pick up and play this week. And I think Jimmy G is the man with the plan week 15 against the Atlanta Falcons. It's not fancy, but he has actually been really solid for fantasy lately, especially the last couple of weeks, 18 and 20 points. And this week, he gets a great matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. Also, with lead running back Elijah Mitchell ruled out for the 49ers, I think there is less of a chance that the 49ers can just hand the ball off the entire game on their way to victory. So with that being said, the hope is that Jimmy sees enough passing volume to succeed in this game. And then taking a quick look at the Falcons points given up to quarterbacks, you can see on the season the second most, the last 5 weeks the first most, and the last 3 weeks the third most. So they are just bleeding points to fantasy quarterbacks. So again, it's not a fancy option, but if you're looking for a streaming option, I do like him as a high quarterback to play against Atlanta. Now we're going to move on to the running back position. I'm going to start with Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns. I do have a few more under the radar players that I'm going to talk about as the list goes on, but I'm going to start with more of a heavy hitter. I just want to bring his name up because he has had a couple down games lately. So he had a couple fantastic games in weeks 9. You see 29.3. And then in week 11, 21.4. And then he had 2 poor fantasy performances on either side of his bye week. So week 12 and 14 against the Baltimore Ravens, 4.9 and 8 points. By the way, I'm going off of half PPR scoring. That is the scoring format I typically go off of. And like I said, those games were against the Baltimore Ravens, who are a much tougher matchup than the Las Vegas Raiders, who he gets to take on in Week 15. I'll just highlight that matchup here. The Raiders, 5th most points allowed to running backs on the season, according to this chart, 4th most the last 5 weeks, and 4th most the last 3 weeks. So they're giving up points to the running back position. This is not an exciting game. It's a low over-under, but the Browns should need to rely on Nick Chubb in this game. Kareem Hunt is also out for this game, who often sees kind of a split in the backfield with Nick Chubb. So that just means Nick Chubb's volume is even more secure. So I like him as a locked-in high running back 1 play. Next up, we have James Robinson, running back of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And it's been a weird last couple of games. You can see his volume, 8 and 6 carries to 0.4 points. It's been really not ideal for fantasy, but James Robinson is a great player, and he gets a fantastic matchup with the Houston Texans in Week 15, who are giving up the most rushing yards in the league and have given up tons of fantasy points to running backs. You can see on the season, the 3rd most points to running backs, the 2nd most points to running backs the last 5 weeks, and then the last 3 weeks, the Texans are giving up the most fantasy points to running backs. So it's hard to get a better matchup than this. Also, with head coach Urban Meyer recently let go as the Jaguars head coach, I expect the team to have some pep in their step and be a little bit rejuvenated. It seems like things were very toxic and just not well run over there with him as the head coach. Urban Meyer also seemed to not like to utilize Robinson to the fullest effect, and interim head coach Darrell Bevell already stated that Robinson is their starting running back and will be played as such, is his quote. So I think that should mean we'll see his volume. James Robinson had been on the injury report recently. That could also be part of the reason why we saw his volume kind of go down lately. But he is now no longer on the injury report. He does not have an injury designation as of this recording, last I checked, which gives me even more confidence in his potential volume in this great matchup with the Texans. And in addition to that, talking about securing his volume, backup running back Carlos Hyde has already been ruled out for this game, so I'm expecting big things out of James Robinson. I like him as a really, really solid running back too. Our next stardom running back is going to be Rhamondre Stevenson of the New England Patriots. This start call is not one that's based on the matchup, as the Colts have been a tough matchup for running backs. Obviously, they did give up that huge game to Leonard Fournette of the Buccaneers, which kind of elevated their ranking in terms of points given up to running backs. But outside of that, they've been really solid against running backs. This stardom call is actually due to his talent and his increase in opportunity with fellow Patriots running back Damien Harris out for this game against the Indianapolis Colts in Week 15. The last time Damien Harris was out, Stevenson lit up the Cleveland Browns, and Stevenson has even been involved in games where Damien Harris was active. You can see in Week 10, he had 20 for 100 on the ground. He put up 25.4 half-point PPR fantasy points. And while I don't necessarily think he's going to, replicate that Week 10 success, that would be crazy. I believe he was one of the best running backs on the week that week. I still like him as a nice volume play running back 2 in Week 15. And I told you I was going to try to get some more options that aren't really those top guys. And that guy this week is going to be Deonte Foreman of the Tennessee Titans. So obviously, I'd rather play a guy like Nick Chubb over Foreman, but if you're really desperate, if you're in a pinch, I think you can do a lot worse than Deonte Foreman this week. So he gets to take on the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have been absolutely atrocious against the run lately. So this is where the Steelers rank on the season, giving up the 7th most points. The last 5 weeks, they're giving up the most points to running backs, and the last 3 weeks, they're giving up the 2nd most points to running backs. So that is crazy. You don't think about the Steelers and think of them having a bad run defense, but that's the case this season and especially lately. So Deonte Foreman has taken over as the lead running back on the ground for the Tennessee Titans, and he hasn't seen a ton of passing game volume, which does limit his upside. You can see his target totals, and most he's had is 2. But I do think he is a nice low running back 2, just based on his running game involvement and a surprisingly good matchup with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now I'm going to go on to the wide receiver position, and the first stardom is going to be Brandin Cooks of the Houston Texans. He has been up and down this season. You can see his point totals here. But the Texans will be starting Davis Mills at quarterback in Week 15 against the Jacksonville Jaguars. And honestly, I think starting Davis Mills is the best option the Texans and Brandin Cooks have for fantasy success. Last week, Davis Mills connected with Brandin Cooks often, and Cooks actually had his first 100-yard game in quite some time, since Week 3. So yeah, that was good to see, that connection there. And he also gets a great matchup with the Jacksonville Jaguars in week 15 on the season. They're giving up the 7th most points to fantasy wide receivers, the 3rd most points to wide receivers over the last 5 weeks, and the 5th most points to fantasy wide receivers over the last 3 weeks. So it's a great matchup, and I like him as a wide receiver to play in week 15. My next stardom wide receiver is going to be a player who I already talked about a little bit when I brought up his quarterback as a stardom, and that's going to be wide receiver DeVante Parker of the Miami Dolphins. He returned from injury in week 13 and saw a solid 5 targets, turning into 62 yards against the New York Giants. And as I already said, rookie standout wide receiver Jalen Waddle is on the COVID-19 list, so DeVante Parker should step in and be the number 1 alpha wide receiver for the Dolphins coming off of their bye week. And the best part, he's taking on the New York Jets, who can't stop anybody. The only worry here is that the Dolphins kind of dominate them on the ground because a lot of teams attack the Jets on the ground versus the air. But with the Waddle injury, and I think that just secures DeVante Parker's role even more. And he doesn't need, 20 targets to be good against the Jets. He just needs a solid target share to put up some nice fantasy points against the New York Jets. So for me, he's a wide receiver 2 in week 15. My final stardom wide receiver is Brandin Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers. He's actually been solid for fantasy lately after an abysmal start to the season. I said I like Jimmy G, and I obviously love Deebo Samuel and George Kittle this week and every week, but I think this matchup is good enough that Aiyuk should also be solid for fantasy. With running back Elijah Mitchell ruled out for the 49ers, I think the passing volume is a little bit more secure, as I already mentioned when I talk about Jimmy Garoppolo, and I also think we could continue to see Deebo Samuel quite involved in the running game, as he has been recently, with Brandin Aiyuk seeing a healthy target share. So as long as Brandin Aiyuk gets the opportunity in this game, it's a great matchup with the Atlanta Falcons. He's been good lately, and I like him as a nice wide receiver to play in week 15 against the Falcons. Now I'm going to talk about a few tight ends, and the first one is going to be Dawson Knox of the Buffalo Bills. He's not quite in that top elite tight end group for me of Travis Kelce, George Kittle, Mark Andrews, but I would put him right in that next tier below them. He's been great for fantasy, and while he can fall victim to the occasional disappearing act, that comes with pretty much almost every tight end in the league. The difference between him and most tight ends, however, is his ability to put up huge blow-up games. You can see he has had quite a few of those this year. With Emmanuel Sanders also ruled out for this game, the Buffalo Bills wide receiver, I think that only provides Dawson Knox a little bit more target security, although we could see those targets go to Gabe Davis, maybe Cole Beasley. We'll have to see how that plays out. But either way, he's involved as it is. So if he does get a boost, that's just a bonus. If not, then he's still going to be good for fantasy. So unless you have one of the big 3 tight ends that I mentioned earlier, or maybe a guy like Rob Gronkowski, Dawson Knox is a virtual must-start play this week. Next, at the tight end position, I like Mike Gesicki this week in week 15 against the Jets. Obviously, you guys could probably see a theme here. The Jets are a good matchup. I already talked about how Jalen Waddle makes DeVante Parker a more safe play, and I think Waddle's absence also means that Gesicki could see some solid volume in this matchup against the Jets. Honestly, it's pretty simple. The Jets are bad, and I like starting players against their defense. So fire up Mike Gesicki as a low to mid tight end 1 option this week. My final tight end stardom is a little bit of a deeper call, and that's going to be Ricky Seals-Jones of the Washington football team. I'm not expecting a lot out of this team in general with their COVID situation. We don't even know who their starting quarterback is going to be. Their game did get pushed back to Tuesday, I believe. So maybe Taylor Heineke or Kyle Allen, who are currently on the COVID list, maybe by then they get removed from the list. We just don't know what's going to happen. It's possible that they just start some off the street practice squad type of guy. We just don't know what's going to happen. But with their starting tight end Logan Thomas out for the season, Ricky Seals-Jones will be their starting tight end, and he has had success in that role already this season. Last week in that role against Dallas, it was disappointing, only 1.3 points. But most tight ends have bad games and have bad games quite regularly, to be honest, unless you're one of those top few guys that I mentioned when I was talking about Dawson Knox. Ricky Seals-Jones to me is a fine option at this weak position that is tight end. The Eagles, who is their matchup, they are also allowing a ton of points to tight ends. So whether it is Taylor Heineke, Kyle Allen, Garrett Gilbert, Kyle Shermer, or whoever, just some guy they grab out of the stands and just throw him in there, put a jersey on him, I do think Ricky Seals-Jones could just benefit from some dump-off passes, and just in general in this good matchup, he should benefit from that. So on the season, the Eagles are giving up the 2nd most points to tight ends. The 4th most over the last 5 weeks, and over the last 3 weeks, you're giving up the 11th most points to tight ends in fantasy. So it's a good matchup. For me, he is a mid to high tight end 2 option if you're in a pinch. Now we're going to move on to my sit-ems. I only have a couple people that I want to talk about. The first one is Derek Carr, quarterback of the Las Vegas Raiders. He's been up and down for fantasy all season long, and honestly, it's just hard to predict when he will show up and when he'll just leave you in a pool of tears after having a horrible fantasy game. Recently, the yardage has been there, but the touchdowns really just have not been there lately. I don't know. It's just not been good for fantasy lately for Derek Carr. In a game that projects to be low scoring against the Cleveland Browns, I think there are plenty of quarterback options out there who have both a higher floor and a higher ceiling than Derek Carr. For me, he is a low quarterback 2, and you can maybe play him as a kind of uninspiring 2 quarterback play if you're in a pinch. But this is Derek Carr, so when you think you can play him, he'll do bad, and now that we're out on him, maybe he'll have a good game. But just with the inconsistency and the low projected point total in this game, I'd just be looking for other options. And finally, maybe the most controversial call of the entire video, I'm going to recommend sitting Terry McLaurin. Now, I have a lot of things to say about this. I was going to say a few things, but there's a lot to kind of break down here. So, first of all, he is not necessarily a must sit, but McLaurin is no longer a must start either. And it is very possible that you have better options on your team and you want to consider sitting Terry McLaurin. He has been disappointing for fantasy this season. And last week he scored 0 points. You can see the last few weeks he had an 18.8 point game in there. Other than that, it's been pretty rough. Last week against Dallas, he had a goose. He did leave early in the game with a concussion, so he didn't play the entire game, but he still did play 33 snaps on offense, which was 49% of the offensive snaps for Washington, and he ended up catching 0 of 3 targets. Now, in Week 15, he takes on the Philadelphia Eagles and cornerback Darius Slay, who have been a tough matchup for fantasy wide receivers this season. In fact, let's pull up the Eagles here. Pull up the Philadelphia Eagles. So on the season, they're giving up some of the fewest points to wide receivers on the season in fantasy, the 27th most points to wide receivers. And yeah, you see the matchup. It's not a good matchup for wide receivers. Additionally, like I already mentioned when talking about Ricky Seals-Jones, starting quarterback Taylor Heineke and backup quarterback Kyle Allen are both on the COVID list. So the Washington football team could be starting more of a practice squad or off the street type of player. This game, like I already said, it got moved back to Tuesday due to all the COVID issues. So we actually won't know for sure who is the starting quarterback until we get closer to the game day. Terry himself is also dealing with an issue. He's coming off a concussion. And while this schedule change, moving the game to Tuesday, it gives him more time to heal. It also means you'll have less pivot options if you have him in your lineup and he is ultimately ruled out on Tuesday. He is an extremely talented player, and he can do well any given week, just like all talented players can. But when you just look at, what he's done for fantasy this season, and there's just so many risk factors involved this week with all the COVID stuff, with his injury. There's just a lot going on with him. I would only recommend playing him as a high wide receiver 3 in my eyes, and monitor the news, see how his concussion is progressing, because last I heard, there's a good chance he plays. But if it starts to take a turn for the worse and he's looking like he might not play, you have to consider that maybe you just want to play someone on a Sunday game, for example, who is going to be active, rather than waiting until Tuesday and then having him be out and having really no good pivot option. So yeah, I would try to look elsewhere, but he's still a high wide receiver 3. So not a must sit, but just temper your expectations if he does end up suiting up. Those are all of my startums and sit-ums for week 15. Now I'm going to quickly recap our calls from week 14 because it's really important to look back and see how we did each week. So I liked Aaron Rodgers and Taysom Hill as quarterback 1s last week in week 14. And they both were. Aaron Rodgers finished as the quarterback 3 overall. Taysom Hill is the quarterback 4 overall in the week. So those were 2 excellent calls on our part here at the Fantasy Football Prodigy channel. I also talked about, actually, hold on, I got to move this to half PPR. So I said I liked Antonio Gibson as a running back 1, even though it was a tough matchup. He'd been hot lately. I thought you should stick with him, and obviously that was a bad call. I don't know who out there was sitting Gibson, but he really flopped. He only had 3.1 points, so definitely not a running back 1. Leonard Fournette, it was against the Bills, and I still said, hey man, underneath the surface, I actually really like this. I liked him as a running back, mid to high running back 1. He finished as the running back 7 on the week, so that was a good call. So far, really good calls other than Antonio Gibson. It looks like Saquon Barkley I liked as a running back 2. He finished as a running back 1, so he exceeded my expectations. He finished as a running back 11 on the week, so that was really, really solid. A really, really good call. I said to start Chuba Hubbard as a low running back 2, and he finished as just outside that, the running back 26, 9.3, and I believe he had a touchdown. So it ended up being a decent call, but we did get a little bit lucky there with him getting into the end zone because he did not have a ton of yardage in that game, if I remember correctly. And did I spell Javonte Williams wrong, or what's going on? Hello? Okay, that was weird. I also said I liked Javonte Williams as a... So I said if Melvin Gordon didn't play, he was a smash running back 1 start. And even if Melvin Gordon did play, I still liked him a ton. So he finished as a running back 1, the running back 8 on the week, as well as Melvin Gordon. But I said to start Javonte Williams basically with full confidence. 20 points, solid running back 1. So that was a good call. And I actually recommended playing DJ Moore, who is not a running back. He is, in fact, a wide receiver. So we got to move over to wide receiver. And is it on half PPR? Yes, it is. And I said I liked him as a safe, low wide receiver 2. He finished as a wide receiver 33 on the week. So not quite a wide receiver 2, which would be 13 to 24 if you're not aware. He was more of a wide receiver 3, but 11.4 points. It wasn't a total bust of a call, but it wasn't the best call on my part. But, you know, it was a good part, was Hunter Renfrow. I liked him actually as a wide receiver 2, and he finished well above that expectation. He finished as a wide receiver 1, the 5th highest scoring wide receiver on the week, over 20 points. So that was really, really awesome. So for the most part, all of our calls were good. The only real bust was Antonio Gibson, who obviously I don't think anyone was really considering sitting unless you had the most stacked running back room available possible in fantasy. And then Chuba Hubbard, we got a little lucky with that call, but it still ended up working out all right. And when we look at the sit-ems, this is just annoying, dude. Mike Davis, I said to sit him. I only liked him as a desperation flex. He finished as a running back 18 with 11.1. I dropped Mike Davis finally after the whole season, and he's actually scoring. Obviously, it's not sustainable just with the volume he's receiving and stuff. And I don't even remember how he scored this much. What did he do? 11 for 44. And of course, he has these games where he'll just randomly be involved in the passing game. And in half PPR, that's enough sometimes. So that's annoying. He ended up being okay for fantasy. And then super surprisingly, I said to sit Rashod Bateman for a number of reasons. And he finished as a wide receiver 22, 13.8 points, just out of nowhere. Okay, so our sit-ups ended up not working out, but if you started those guys, then you must have a magic ball. Like, what do they call that? Like a magic crystal ball that sees the future, because I don't know how you would have known that. But anyways, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. We had some really, really good calls in Week 14, and I'm hoping Week 15 is even better. Honestly, I'm not even going to ask for it to be better. I'm going to say it's just as good as last week because it's going to be hard to be better than last week. So yeah, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video or found it helpful. Subscribe to the channel for more fantasy football content. And I'll talk to you guys later. Peace out.